Leo Barrett wiped the sweat from his forehead as he hauled another sack of grain into the storage barn. 12 years old and already doing the work of a grown man, his mother often said. The twin sons of Green Hollow beat down on the farm, making everything shimmer in the heat. He didn't mind the hard work. This was home, even if home happened to be on a planet 300 light-years from Earth. A low growl rumbled from the barn's entrance. Leo smiled without looking up. He knew that sound better than his own heartbeat. Yeah, rascal, I'm almost done, Leo said, dropping the sack with a thud. Then we can check the south fence like you've been bugging me about all morning. The honey badger padded into the barn, his thick gray and black fur dusty from digging. Rascal was bigger than his Earth cousins, thanks to the genetic tweaks the colonial science teams had made years ago. He stood nearly 2 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed close to 50 pounds of pure muscle and attitude. His dark eyes fixed on Leo with an intelligence that sometimes made visitors uncomfortable. Leo's mother said Rascal had been part of a wildlife program, something about helping colonists adapt Earth animals to new worlds. When Leo was just 3, Rascal had been a cub in the rehabilitation center where his mother worked. The badger had escaped his enclosure one day and found tiny Leo playing in the grass outside. Instead of the disaster everyone feared, the two had simply sat together, the cub curling up in the toddler's lap. They'd been inseparable ever since. "Leo, come quick." His mother's voice cut through the afternoon air, sharp with urgency. Leo ran from the barn, Rascal loping beside him with surprising speed. They found Dr. Ann Barrett standing in the yard, her datapad clutched in both hands, staring at the sky. Other colonists were emerging from their homes and fields, all looking up. Ships were descending through the atmosphere, not human ships. These were angular, covered in panels that seemed to shift colors, and they moved with a grace that human engineering hadn't quite mastered. Leo counted 6 of them, each the size of a small building. "Are those traders?" Leo asked, though he already knew the answer. Traders sent messages first. These ships had just appeared. "I don't think so, sweetheart," his mother said softly. She pulled Leo close as the ship settled in the open field beyond the colony's main cluster of buildings. Captain Richard Hayes and his small defense force were already rushing toward the landing site, weapons ready but not raised. Green Hollow only had 20 soldiers for the entire colony of 300 families. They were farmers and scientists, not warriors. The ship's hatches opened. Beings stumbled out, and even from a distance, Leo could see something was wrong. They moved like injured animals, desperate and afraid. Their skin was a pale blue, and they had 4 arms each. Children clung to adults. Some were being carried. "They're refugees," Anne said, her scientist's mind analyzing what she saw. "Those are Telonians. I've read about them in the xenobiology journals. They're traders, peaceful people." "Then why do they look so scared?" Leo asked. The answer came 3 hours later. The Telonians had been given shelter in the community hall. Their leader, a female, named Nira, who spoke halting English, told a story that made everyone in the room fall silent. The Vryn Dominion had come to their system without warning. The Telonians had no military, only trade ships and exploration vessels. They'd tried to negotiate, tried to surrender, tried everything. The Vryn had destroyed their ships anyway, calling them weak and unworthy. Nira's fleet of 6 ships was all that escaped from a population of millions. "They're still hunting us," Nira said, her voice breaking. "The Vryn don't leave survivors. They say it encourages others to resist." Leo felt his mother's hand tighten on his shoulder. Around the room, colonists whispered nervously. Captain Hayes stood and tried to project confidence. "You're safe here. Earth's colonial defense will protect you. We'll send a message to command and—" The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red. An alarm began to wail, the one Leo had only heard during drills. The colony's defense system had detected incoming ships. Rascal's growl turned into something Leo had rarely heard, a sound of pure aggression. The badger's fur bristled, making him look twice his size. "Everyone to the shelters!" Hayes shouted. "Move now!" The crowd erupted into controlled chaos. Families grabbed children and ran for the underground bunkers. Leo's mother pulled him toward the door, but he saw something that made him stop. A small Telonian child, no bigger than Leo himself, had been separated from the group in the panic. The child stood frozen in the center of the hall, all four arms wrapped around their body, eyes wide with terror. Leo pulled free from his mother and ran back. Rascal followed without hesitation, always at Leo's side. The boy reached the Telonian child and took one of their hands. "Come on," Leo said. "I'll keep you safe, I promise." The child looked at Leo, then at Rascal, and something in the badger's fierce protective stance must have been universal. The child nodded and ran with them. They made it to the shelter just as the ground shook. Through the closing bunker door, Leo caught a glimpse of the sky. More ships, bigger than the Telonian vessels, were descending. These weren't sleek or graceful. They were brutal, covered in weapons, painted in dark colors that seemed to absorb light. The Vryn had found them. In the crowded shelter, Leo sat with the Telonian child who had grabbed onto him and wouldn't let go. His mother tried to coax them apart, but the child just held tighter. Through broken English and hand gestures, the child told Leo their name was Pip. "It's okay," Leo whispered, even as explosions rumbled overhead. "Rascal and I won't let anything happen to you." The honey badger pressed against both children, his growl a constant promise. Whatever came next, Leo thought, they'd face it together. That's what family did, even if your family happened to include the toughest animal Earth had ever produced. Above them, the first Vryn soldiers were landing. The galaxy's most feared empire had come to a backwater farm colony, expecting easy prey. They had no idea that they'd just made the biggest mistake of their existence. They'd come between a human kid and someone he'd sworn to protect. The Vryn were about to learn a lesson that every creature on Earth already knew. Never, ever mess with a honey badger's family. The shelter smelled like fear and recycled air. Leo sat with Pip curled against his side, Rascal's head resting on both their laps. The explosions had stopped an hour ago, replaced by something worse: silence. His mother paced near the communications console, trying to raise anyone on the surface. Nothing but static answered. "They've jammed everything," Captain Hayes said quietly. He stood by the shelter's heavy door, his rifle held ready. "Old tactic. Cut communications, isolate the target, then make demands." "What kind of demands?" someone asked from the crowded room. Hayes didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what conquerors wanted: surrender or death. Leo felt Pip trembling and squeezed the child's hand. Four thin fingers wrapped around his two, holding tight. In the past few hours, Leo had learned that Pip was 8 years old, loved mathematics, and had watched their entire homeworld burn from space. No kid should have to see that. Nobody should. A metallic clang echoed through the shelter. Then another. Someone was opening the door from outside. Hayes raised his weapon, and other colonists with guns formed a line. Leo's mother pushed him behind her, but Leo held onto Pip and Rascal, refusing to let go. The door swung open. Bright light flooded in, temporarily blinding everyone. When Leo's eyes adjusted, he saw them. Vryn soldiers, 7 feet tall, covered in armor that looked like overlapping black scales. Their faces were reptilian, with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern. Each carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. "Humans," the lead Vryn said, his voice translated by a device on his chest. "You will come to the surface. You will surrender the Telonian refugees. You will not resist. These are not requests, and if we refuse?" Captain Hayes asked, not lowering his weapon. The Vryn's laugh was like rocks grinding together. "Then we will collapse this shelter with you inside. But first we will burn every building above, every field, every animal. Then we seal this hole and leave you to suffocate in the dark. Choose quickly, human. My patience is limited." Leo saw his mother's face go pale. Around the shelter, people looked at each other, fear written in every expression. The Telonians huddled together, and Nira stepped forward with dignity, ready to sacrifice herself for the humans who had tried to help. That's when Rascal moved. The honey badger's head lifted, his nostrils flaring. His eyes locked onto the Vryn commander with an intensity that made Leo's breath catch. The badger's lips pulled back, showing teeth that had cracked earth bones and torn through roots harder than concrete. A sound emerged from Rascal's throat, low and continuous, a promise of violence that transcended language. The nearest Vryn soldier actually took a step backward. His companions shifted nervously, their weapons tracking the small animal that stared at them with absolute fearlessness. "What is that creature?" the commander demanded. "That's Rascal," Leo said, standing up before his mother could stop him. "And if you hurt anyone here, he'll make you regret it." The commander stared at Leo, then threw his head back and laughed. The sound was cruel, mocking. "A human child threatens me? With a pet?" He turned to his soldiers. "This is what we conquer. Primitives who send younglings to speak for them. We'll come up," Captain Hayes said quickly, trying to regain control. "Just give us a moment to—" "No," Leo said. The word came out steady and clear. His mother grabbed his arm, but Leo kept talking. "You want the Telonians? You'll have to come down here and take them, and Rascal will be waiting." The commander's amusement vanished. He raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Leo. "Foolish child." "I will." Rascal launched himself forward like a missile. The badger crossed 15 feet in a heartbeat, claws extended, teeth bared. The Vryn commander barely had time to react before 40 pounds of furious animal hit his chest plate. The force knocked the 7-foot soldier backward into his companions. Chaos erupted. Vryn soldiers tried to shoot, but Rascal was too fast, too close, and the commander was in the way. The badger's claws found gaps in the armor, drew alien blood. His jaws clamped onto the commander's weapon arm. The Vryn screamed, a high-pitched sound of pain and shock. "Rascal, come!" Leo shouted. The honey badger released his target and bounded back to Leo's side, taking up a defensive position in front of the boy and Pip. The Vryn commander staggered back through the door, green blood dripping from a dozen wounds. His soldiers grabbed him and pulled him to safety. "You will die for that," the commander roared. "All of you. I will personally." The heavy door slammed shut. Captain Hayes and 3 other men threw the manual locks, sealing them in. For a moment, the shelter was silent except for harsh breathing and Rascal's continued growling. Then Hayes turned to Leo, and the man was actually grinning. "Kid, that was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Probably both," Leo's mother said, but she was smiling too, even as tears ran down her face. She pulled Leo into a crushing hug. "Don't you ever scare me like that again?" "They were going to hurt us anyway," Leo said into her shoulder. "At least now they know we're not easy prey." What Leo couldn't see was the effect his action had beyond the shelter. Across the colony, other families huddled in hiding watched through windows and cracks as the Vryn commander emerged from the bunker, wounded and furious. Word spread fast in small communities. The Barrett kid and his badger had made the aliens bleed. 3 farm families made a choice. If a 12-year-old could stand up to the Vryn, maybe they could too. Old hunting rifles came out of closets. Farm equipment that could be weaponized was quietly prepared. The seed of resistance had been planted. In the forest beyond the colony, Leo led Pip through paths he'd walked 1,000 times. They'd escaped through an emergency tunnel, one the Vryn didn't know about. Hayes had ordered it, saying Leo was their best chance to keep Pip safe. The child couldn't be taken by the Vryn, not after everything they'd survived. Rascal ranged ahead, his nose to the ground, scouting for danger. Leo carried a pack with food, water, and a communicator that Hayes promised would work on an encrypted channel. His mother had wanted to come, but she was needed at the shelter. She was a doctor and people were hurt. "Where are we going?" Pip asked in their broken English. "Old weather station," Leo said, pushing aside a branch, "about 5 miles north. Nobody uses it anymore. We'll be safe there until Captain Hayes can figure out a plan." They walked in silence for a while, the forest thick around them. Green Hollow's plants were Earth-like enough thanks to decades of terraforming. Leo knew every tree, every game trail, every place where the ground got soft. The Vryn, with their superior technology and weapons, didn't know any of that. A sound made Leo freeze. Rascal's head snapped around, ears forward. Through the trees, Leo saw movement. Vryn soldiers, 4 of them, moving in a search pattern. They hadn't seen Leo and Pip yet, but they would soon. Leo's mind raced. He couldn't outrun armored soldiers. Couldn't fight them. But maybe he didn't need to. This was his home. He knew things they didn't. "Pip, see that fallen log?" Leo whispered, pointing. "Hide under it. Don't make a sound. Rascal and I will lead them away. But trust me." Pip crawled under the log, disappearing into the shadows. Leo picked up a rock and threw it hard to the left. It crashed through the brush and the Vryn soldiers immediately turned toward the sound, weapons ready. Leo ran right, making just enough noise to be heard. Behind him, Rascal followed, but Leo knew the Badger was ready to circle back if needed. The soldiers spotted him and gave chase, shouting in their harsh language. Leo led them on a winding path, deliberately choosing difficult terrain. The Vrin's heavy armor slowed them in the thick underbrush. He splashed through a stream, knowing it would cool his trail. Then he climbed a rocky outcrop that required using hands and feet. By the time he reached the top, the Vrin were struggling below, their armor clearly not designed for wilderness pursuit. One soldier was overheating, his armor venting steam. Leo remembered reading that reptilian species often had trouble regulating body temperature. That gave him an idea. A dangerous, probably stupid idea. But then again, Hayes had already called him brave and stupid both. Leo smiled and kept running, already planning his next move. The Vrin thought they were hunting him. They had no idea they were the ones being led into a trap. A farm boy and his honey badger were about to teach an empire a lesson about underestimating Earth. 3 weeks had passed since the Vrin arrived on Green Hollow. Leo sat in the hidden network of caves that had become the Resistance's base, updating a hand-drawn map by the light of a small lamp. His fingers were stained with ink and dirt, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd had a real shower. But they were winning. Slowly, carefully, they were actually winning. Rascal dozed nearby, his body covered in new scars from a dozen encounters with Vrin patrols. The honey badger had become something of a legend among the colonists. Stories spread about how he'd attacked a Vrin scout from above, dropping from a tree branch, how he'd led an entire squad into quicksand in the eastern marsh. The Vrin had started calling him the Shadow with Teeth in their reports, which Leo had intercepted using his mother's old communications equipment. Leo, they're here, Pip said, poking their head into the cave chamber. The young Telonian had become Leo's constant companion and translator. Pip's species had a gift for languages, and they'd learned English completely in just 3 weeks. Leo stood and stretched, his back protesting. He was sleeping on stone now, eating dried rations, and somehow had become the person everyone looked to for plans. At 12 years old, it was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Outside, a small ship had landed in the clearing they'd carefully hidden from Vrin sensors. Not a Vrin ship, though. This one bore the markings of the Free Traders Alliance, a loose confederation of species that operated outside the major galactic powers. Ambassador Nira emerged first, accompanied by 3 beings Leo had never seen before. One was covered in what looked like blue feathers, standing on 4 legs with 2 arms. Another was humanoid, but made of what appeared to be living crystal. The third was small, barely 3 feet tall, with 6 eyes and skin that shifted colors. Leo Barrett, Nira said formally. May I introduce the Council of Free Worlds representatives? They have come a very long way to meet you. Leo felt his face burn with embarrassment. I'm nobody special. Just a farm kid who got lucky a few times. The crystalline being spoke, its voice musical like wind chimes. Lucky? You've held off a Vrin occupation force for 3 weeks with no military support. Your tactics have destroyed 4 of their atmospheric fighters and disabled their main command post twice. The Vrin commander has requested reinforcements 3 times. That's not luck, young human. That's warfare. And more importantly, the small 6-eyed being added, you've given hope to 47 other worlds currently under Vrin threat. They're watching what happens on Green Hollow. If a human child and a badger can resist, maybe they can too. Leo hadn't thought about that. He'd just been trying to keep his family and friends safe. What do you need from me? The feathered being stepped forward. Your help. The Vrin are expanding faster than we predicted. They target agricultural worlds and remote colonies, places with small populations and no military. They're systematic about it. Conquer, enslave, strip resources, move on. Why don't the big government stop them? Leo asked. Politics, Nira said bitterly. The major powers don't want to start a war over frontier worlds. We're too small, too far away, too unimportant. By the time they decide to act, millions will be dead or enslaved. The crystalline being's colors shifted to something darker. But you've shown a different way. Small doesn't mean weak. Remote doesn't mean helpless. We're forming a network of resistance across all threatened systems. We need someone to show others how to fight smart instead of strong. I'm 12, Leo said flatly. I don't know anything about war. You know about adaptation, the feathered being countered. About using terrain. About psychological warfare, about turning your enemy's assumptions against them. These are things the Vrin don't understand. They think power comes from weapons and numbers. Rascal chose that moment to wake up, stretching with a yawn that showed every one of his impressive teeth. He padded over to Leo and leaned against the boy's leg, watching the visitors with alert eyes. The six-eyed being made a sound like laughter. And you have him. Do you know what we've learned about honey badgers, Leo? Your people enhanced them for colonial protection. But the base species was already remarkable. They're one of the few Earth creatures that will fight enemies 10 times their size without hesitation. They have loose skin that makes them hard to grab or bite. Their metabolism can handle most toxins, and their temperament makes them completely fearless. Rascal's not fearless, Leo said, scratching behind the badger's ears. He's just stubborn and protective. He won't back down when someone he loves is in danger. Exactly, Nira said softly. Just like you. The council representatives spent the next 6 hours sharing information. They showed Leo maps of other systems, data on Vryn tactics, weaknesses in their technology. The reptilian species struggled in high humidity. Their armor had vulnerable points at the joints, and their command structure was rigid to the point of predictability. In return, Leo shared everything he'd learned. How to use simple farm equipment as weapons, how to create diversions that looked like technical failures, how to move through terrain that scanners couldn't properly map, how to make the enemy so frustrated they made mistakes. But the most important thing Leo shared was about Rascal. The council had been fascinated by the Enhanced Animals program. Leo's mother had explained it to him years ago. When humans first started spreading to other worlds, they realized they needed more than just technology. They needed the same partnership with animals that had helped humans survive on Earth. Dogs had gone to the stars, of course. Cats too. But for remote, dangerous colonies, something else was needed. Something that could protect families from local predators, dig through tough soil, and never give up no matter how bad things got. Honey badgers, enhanced with longer lifespans and increased intelligence, had been perfect. There are others, the crystalline being said thoughtfully. Other enhanced animals scattered across human colonies. We've been thinking about this wrong. It's not just about human resistance. It's about showing the galaxy what partnership means. An idea began forming in Leo's mind. It was ambitious, probably impossible, but then again, he'd been doing impossible things for 3 weeks now. What if we could bring them together? Leo said slowly. Not just humans, but the animals too. Every species that the big powers abandoned. We form a real network, share tactics, support each other. The Vryn think they're fighting primitive colonists. What if they're actually fighting something they've never encountered before? The council members looked at each other. The feathered being's crest raised in what Leo had learned was excitement. A united front of the small. Those the galaxy forgot. Led by a human child and a honey badger, the six-eyed being added. The Vryn will think it's a joke until it's too late. It's not a joke, Leo said firmly. And I'm not leading anything. I'm just sharing what works. Everyone fights for their own home, their own way. We just help each other do it better. Nira smiled, all 4 of her hands gesturing in approval. This is exactly why we came to you, Leo Barrett. You understand something the empires don't. Power isn't about control. It's about cooperation. As the council ship left that night, Leo stood with Rascal looking at the stars. Somewhere up there, the Vryn were planning their next move. But down here and on 47 other worlds, people were planning too. Farmers and traders, colonists and refugees, humans and aliens, and enhanced animals from Earth. The Vryn had made a mistake coming to Green Hollow. They'd wanted an easy target and found a stubborn farm kid with a honey badger. Now they were going to discover that the galaxy had been full of stubborn fighters all along. They'd just been too spread out and too scared to work together. Not anymore. Leo reached down and patted Rascal's head. The badger looked up at him with those intelligent eyes, and Leo knew they were thinking the same thing. Time to show the galaxy what the small could do when they stood together. Time to make the Vryn regret every world they'd ever attacked. Time to teach an empire that some rules should never be broken. And the most important rule was simple. Don't come between a human and those they love. New Manitoba should have been bustling with life. Instead, Leo crouched behind an overturned harvester in the empty colony, watching Vryn dropships circle overhead like predatory birds. The intel had been solid. The Vryn were coming here next, planning to make an example of another agricultural world. What they didn't know was that every colonist had evacuated 3 days ago, leaving behind a ghost town and a very angry 12-year-old with a honey badger. 17 ships, Pip whispered from their hiding spot inside the harvester's cab. The young Telonian had insisted on coming despite Leo's protests. "That's 3 more than predicted." "Good," Leo said, checking the remote triggers on his makeshift devices. More of them to embarrass. Rascal was somewhere in the colony's ventilation system, moving through the underground network of tunnels that Leo had spent 2 days mapping. The Badger wore a small camera harness that fed video back to Leo's handheld screen. Right now, Rascal was approaching the colony's main power junction. The Vryn landed in force, their commander the same one Leo had humiliated back on Green Hollow. Commander Drask had a personal vendetta now. Good. Angry enemies made mistakes. Through his binoculars, Leo watched the Vryn troops fan out, expecting resistance. When they found none, confusion rippled through their ranks. Drask barked orders, and soldiers began entering buildings, searching for the colonists they'd come to conquer. Leo waited until most of the troops were inside structures before activating the first surprise. The colony's agricultural system, designed to maintain perfect growing conditions, suddenly went haywire. Sprinklers activated throughout the settlement, but instead of water, they sprayed a mixture Leo had created using industrial chemicals from the processing plant. Not harmful to humans, but to reptilian species with sensitive skin, it was intensely irritating. Vryn soldiers stumbled from buildings, clawing at their armor, trying to wipe away the chemical mixture. Their shouts of anger and discomfort were satisfying, but Leo wasn't done. He triggered the second phase. Every heating unit in the colony activated simultaneously, pushing the internal temperatures of buildings to dangerous levels. For the already overheating Vryn, it was unbearable. They evacuated buildings faster than they'd entered, gathering in the open streets where Leo wanted them. That's when Rascal reached the power junction. On Leo's screen, he watched the honey badger's claws make short work of the protective covering. With precise movements that showed the animal's enhanced intelligence, Rascal disconnected specific power couplings in a sequence Leo had practiced with him dozens of times. The colony's defensive grid, normally used to protect against local wildlife, activated with Vryn soldiers standing in its field. Non-lethal but powerful electromagnetic pulses scrambled their armor systems. Shields flickered and died. Communications went silent. Targeting systems failed. Leo allowed himself a small smile. The Vryn had come expecting primitives with simple weapons. Instead, they'd walked into a carefully prepared environment where every system could be weaponized. But then something went wrong. One of the Vryn dropships orbiting overhead detected the EM pulses and began targeting the power junction. Leo saw it on his screen a second before it happened. "Rascal, get out now!" Leo screamed into his communicator. The honey badger moved fast, his body a blur as he raced through the tunnels. But the Vryn ship's weapons were faster. The power junction exploded, collapsing part of the tunnel system. Leo's screen went dark. "Rascal!" Leo was running before he realized he'd moved, sprinting across the open ground toward the access hatch. Pip shouted behind him, but Leo didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Rascal was down there. Vryn soldiers spotted him. Energy blasts scorched the ground near Leo's feet. He dodged behind a storage container, his heart hammering. He had to reach Rascal. Had to know if his friend was okay. A blast hit close enough that the heat singed Leo's hair. He fell, rolled, came up running. Another blast, another. The Vryn were closing in and Leo had no weapons, no plan. Just the desperate need to reach his best friend. Strong hands grabbed Leo from behind. He fought, kicked, screamed, but Vryn armor was too strong. They lifted him off the ground as easily as picking up a doll. "Finally," Commander Drask said, approaching with obvious satisfaction despite his irritated skin. "The famous human youngling. You've caused me considerable trouble, child. Let me go. My friend is down there. He might be hurt." "Your animal?" Drask laughed. "It's likely dead. Buried under tons of rubble. A fitting end for a creature that should never have challenged its superiors." Leo stopped struggling. Something cold and hard settled in his chest. He looked Drask in the eyes, and the Vryn commander actually took a step back from the expression on the boy's face. "If you killed Rascal," Leo said quietly, "you've made the biggest mistake of your life." "Threats from a primitive child," Drask said, recovering his composure. "How amusing. Take him to the ship. The Emperor will enjoy this prize." They carried Leo to the largest dropship and threw him in a holding cell barely big enough to stand in. Through the small window, Leo could see the colony below. Vryn soldiers were regrouping, their equipment being repaired. And somewhere under all that rubble, Rascal might be dying. No, Leo refused to believe it. Honey badgers were survivors. If anything could dig itself out of a collapsed tunnel, it was Rascal. Leo had to believe that, had to hold on to hope. The ship lifted off and Leo watched New Manitoba shrink below them. He'd failed. The Vryn had him, and worse, they thought they'd killed Rascal. Pip was alone down there. The Resistance had lost its symbol, unless it hadn't. As the ship climbed toward orbit, Leo noticed something odd. The Vryn soldiers were confused, checking their armor, looking at each other nervously. Whatever damage Leo's traps had done to their equipment, it was more extensive than they'd realized. And Leo had seen something during his capture, something important. The Vryn command ship in orbit, visible through the window, looked nearly identical to the ones at Green Hollow. Same design, same layout, which meant the same weaknesses. Leo was 13 now, his birthday having passed during the Resistance. Old enough to know that sometimes you lost battles, but also old enough to know that losing a battle wasn't the same as losing the war. The Vryn thought capturing him was a victory. They had no idea they'd just brought their enemy right to the heart of their operation. As the ship docked with the orbital command vessel, Leo pressed his hand against the cold wall of his cell and made a silent promise. If Rascal was alive, Leo would get back to him. If Rascal was dead, Leo would make sure every Vryn in this fleet remembered the name of the badger who had made them afraid. Either way, the Vryn were about to learn something important about humans. They didn't just fight for survival. They fought for each other, for their friends, for their family, and there was no force in the galaxy more dangerous than a human who'd lost someone they loved. The cell door opened. Vryn guards gestured for Leo to follow. He stood straight, met their eyes without flinching, and walked forward. He was heading into the enemy's stronghold alone and unarmed, but he wasn't helpless. Not even close. He'd spent weeks learning how the Vryn thought, how they operated, what they feared. Time to use that knowledge. Time to show Commander Drask and his empire that capturing Leo Barrett wasn't a victory. It was a countdown to their defeat. The Vryn flagship Dominator reeked of recycled air and reptilian musk. Leo had been aboard for 6 hours, paraded through corridors as if he were a trophy. Vryn crew members stopped to stare at the human child who had caused so much trouble. Some looked curious. Others looked angry. Leo ignored them all, his eyes constantly scanning, memorizing layouts, noting weak points. Commander Drask had taken particular pleasure in the tour, showing Leo the ship's weapons, its shields, its powerful engines. "This is real power, human youngling," Drask had said. "Not your primitive tricks and animal companions. True technological superiority." Leo had said nothing. Let them think him defeated. Let them think him scared. He was busy counting guards, observing shift changes, noting that the Vryn's armor still glitched occasionally from the electromagnetic damage at New Manitoba. Now he sat in a cell in the ship's brig, alone with his thoughts. The cell was designed for beings much larger than him, which meant he could move around freely. Small advantages. That's what his mother had taught him. In any bad situation, find the small advantages and exploit them. A sound made Leo freeze. Scratching. Coming from the ventilation grate near the ceiling. It could be anything. Ship rodents, structural settling, his imagination. But Leo's heart knew better. He stood on the cell's bench and pressed his ear to the grate. More scratching. Deliberate, rhythmic, then a familiar snuffling sound. "Rascal?" Leo whispered. The scratching intensified. Leo's hand shook as he worked the grate's fasteners. The Vryn had taken everything from him, but they'd designed this cell for large prisoners. They hadn't thought about what a desperate human child could do with determined fingers and a basic understanding of leverage. The grate came free. A moment later, a dusty, bloody, absolutely beautiful honey badger squeezed through the opening and dropped into Leo's arms. Leo caught him, nearly fell, but managed to stay standing as Rascal's weight hit him. The badger was hurt, covered in cuts and singed fur, but alive. Gloriously, impossibly alive. Leo buried his face in Rascal's fur and cried. He couldn't help it. All the fear, all the stress, all the responsibility he'd carried for months came out in silent sobs. Rascal made soft churring sounds, the noise he only made when comforting Leo after nightmares. "How did you even get here?" Leo whispered. "How did you find me?" As if in answer, Rascal's harness camera, somehow still functional, had a blinking light. Leo checked it and found recorded footage. His breath caught as he watched. Rascal digging through rubble, injured but relentless. Rascal tracking Leo's scent to the landing site. Rascal hiding in the dropship's landing gear during takeoff, clinging to the underside of the vessel during the flight to orbit. The Badger had ridden on the outside of a spaceship through atmospheric exit. "You're insane," Leo said, half laughing, half crying. "You're completely insane." Rascal just looked at him with those intelligent eyes as if to say, "You're my human." Where else would I be? A plan began forming in Leo's mind. The Vryn thought they had won. They had the human child. They'd destroyed the Resistance's symbol, and they were preparing to make an example of New Manitoba for the entire sector. But they'd made one critical error. They'd brought both Leo and Rascal onto their command ship. "Okay, buddy," Leo said, checking Rascal's injuries. "Nothing life-threatening, though the Badger would need proper medical attention soon. I've seen the ship's layout. I know where they keep prisoners from other raids. If we can free them and cause enough chaos, maybe we can damage this ship badly enough that the Resistance has a chance." Rascal's response was to head straight for the ventilation grate. The Badger's mission was clear: find more enemies to bite. What followed was 3 hours of carefully planned mayhem. Leo moved through the ventilation system with Rascal scouting ahead. They reached the main prisoner hold first, where Leo found exactly what he'd hoped for. Dozens of beings from different species, all captured during Vryn raids. Farmers, traders, fighters, all angry, all ready for payback. Leo worked the cell locks using a trick Captain Hayes had taught him. Electronic locks had manual overrides for emergencies. The Vryn had them in predictable locations. Within minutes, the cells were open. "Listen," Leo said to the assembled prisoners, speaking loudly enough for the translation devices most wore to pick up his words. "This ship has weaknesses. I've studied them for months. The Vryn's armor overheats in sustained combat. Their shield generators are powerful but inflexible. Their command structure is rigid. If we hit them fast, hit them hard, and don't give them time to adapt, we can take this ship." A tall being covered in green scales spoke up. "Why should we trust a human child?" Rascal stepped forward, fixing the speaker with a stare that had made Vryn soldiers retreat. The Honey Badger's message was clear. "Question Leo, deal with me." The scaled being actually smiled. "Or perhaps we trust the child with the fierce guardian. I am Toros, former security chief. I'll help coordinate." Others volunteered their skills. An engineer who knew Vryn systems. A pilot who'd flown similar ships. A medic who could treat injuries. In minutes, Leo had an army. Small, exhausted, undernourished, but motivated by weeks or months of captivity. They moved through the ship in coordinated strikes. Rascal became a ghost, appearing from vents to attack isolated guards, then vanishing before reinforcements arrived. The freed prisoners used captured weapons, turned the Vryn's own technology against them. Leo directed them using the ship's own communication system, hacked by their engineer. But Commander Drask was no fool. Once he realized what was happening, he sealed off sections of the ship and began venting atmosphere in corridors where prisoners moved. Leo's forces were pushed back, taking casualties. Victory was slipping away. That's when Leo remembered something from the tour. The Dominator's reactor room. Drask had shown it to Leo proudly, boasting about its power output. But Leo had seen what Drask hadn't mentioned. The cooling system was the same design as the armor, vulnerable to the same humidity issues that plagued Vryn troops on planets like Green Hollow. "We need to reach the reactor," Leo told Toros. "Can you get me there?" "That's suicide. It's in the most heavily guarded section of the ship." "I don't need to survive it," Leo said quietly. "I just need to get there." Rascal made a sound Leo had never heard before, almost like a protest. The Badger put himself between Leo and the corridor leading to the reactor. "I'm not leaving you behind," Leo said, understanding. "We go together." Like always, the final push to the reactor was brutal. Toros and the other prisoners held the Vryn forces back, while Leo and Rascal raced through corridors filled with emergency lighting and alarm klaxons. Vryn guards tried to stop them, but Rascal was a fury of claws and teeth, and Leo was small enough to slip through gaps in the defenders' formation. They reached the reactor room. Leo worked frantically on the cooling systems, overriding safeties, pushing the reactor to output far beyond its designed capacity. The room temperature climbed rapidly. Alerts screamed warnings that Leo ignored. "I've broadcast our location to every Resistance ship in range," Leo said to Rascal, his hands flying over controls. "And I've opened a data burst with everything on this ship. Fleet positions, tactics, weaknesses. Even if we don't make it, the Resistance will have everything they need." Rascal pressed against Leo's leg, and Leo knelt down to hug his best friend one more time. "I'm sorry," Leo whispered. "I'm sorry I brought you here. You should have stayed safe on Green Hollow." The honey badger licked Leo's face, which he only did when he was happy, as if to say there was nowhere else he'd rather be. Explosions rocked the ship. The reactor was failing, but not fast enough. Commander Drask would reach them soon, and when he did, he'd shut everything down. Leo had failed. Then the wall exploded inward. Not from inside the ship, but from outside. A boarding craft had latched onto the hull and breached it. Through the smoke and debris, Leo saw figures emerging. Human figures. And aliens. And in the front, her four arms gesturing frantically, was Nira. "Leo, we got your signal, move!" The rescue was chaos. The boarding team grabbed Leo and Rascal, dragging them back through the breach as Vryn forces closed in. Weapons fire filled the air. Someone threw Leo over their shoulder, and he had a confused view of Rascal being carried by a massive alien who cradled the badger like a precious artifact. They made it to the boarding craft, which detached and fired its engines. Behind them, the Dominator's reactor finally gave up, and the massive command ship listed in space, power failing, shields dropping. Leo watched from the craft's window as resistance ships swarmed the disabled flagship. After months of running and hiding, they had finally struck a real blow. And as consciousness left him exhausted beyond measure, his last sight was Rascal curled up next to him. Both of them battered but alive, both of them still together. 6 months after the Dominator fell, Leo stood in the south field of his family's farm and watched ships fill the sky. Not invaders this time. Allies. Dozens of species from across the frontier had come to Green Hollow, responding to a message that had spread like wildfire through the resistance network. The Vryn Empire was making its final move, and they'd chosen Leo's home as ground zero. Leo was 13 now, taller by a few inches, his face leaner from months of survival. Rascal stood beside him, the honey badger's fur grown back over his scars. They'd both healed, but neither had forgotten. The galaxy had changed in those 6 months, and they'd changed with it. "Quite a sight," Captain Hayes said, walking up to join them. The man had new scars too, and gray in his hair that hadn't been there before. "Never thought I'd see the day when 50 different species all agreed on something." "They're not doing it for politics," Leo said, watching a Telonian transport land near a crystalline ship from the Council. "They're doing it because they're tired of being afraid." The intelligence from the Dominator had been devastating for the Vryn. Every secret, every tactical plan, every weakness exposed. The Resistance had used it well, liberating 3 systems and disrupting operations in a dozen more. But it had also triggered the response everyone feared. The Vryn Emperor himself was coming with the full Imperial Armada. Not to conquer, to exterminate. The message had been broadcast across all channels. The Emperor had declared Green Hollow an example. Every living thing on the planet would be burned away, the land salted with radiation, the world left as a warning. This is what happens when primitives resist their betters. But the Resistance had sent its own message. "Come to Green Hollow. Stand with us. Win or lose, we fight together," and they'd come. Farmers with civilian ships retrofitted with weapons. Traders with cargo vessels modified for combat. Species the big galactic powers had abandoned now stood shoulder to shoulder, preparing to face an empire. Leo's mother found him before the final briefing. She hugged him tight and he let her, even though he was technically a military advisor now and supposed to project confidence. "You don't have to be here for this part," she said. "You've done enough. You could evacuate with the other children." "Pip isn't evacuating," Leo pointed out. The young Telonian had become a skilled communications officer, coordinating between the various species who didn't share languages. "Besides, this is my home. I'm not leaving." Ann Barrett looked at her son and saw the man he was becoming. "When did you grow up?" "Somewhere between getting captured and watching a spaceship's reactor melt down," Leo said with a slight smile. "It's been a busy year." The war room was crowded with beings of every shape and size. Holograms showed the approaching Vryn fleet. 200 warships, including the Emperor's personal flagship, a vessel 3 times the size of the Dominator. It was overkill and everyone knew it. The Emperor was making a statement. "We can't win a straight fight," Admiral Torres said. The human officer had arrived 2 months ago with Earth's official support, finally approved now that the Resistance had proven itself. We're outnumbered 5-1 and their ships are better armed. Then we don't fight straight, Leo said. All eyes turned to him, and he felt the weight of their expectations. The Emperor's coming here personally because he's angry. We embarrassed the Vryn Empire, made them look weak. That's not military strategy, that's pride. Pride we can use, Nira added, following Leo's thought. The Emperor wants to personally oversee Green Hollow's destruction. He'll be at the front of the fleet, not safely in the rear. Leo pulled up schematics of the Imperial flagship. The Dominator's data included design specs for this ship. It has the same cooling system vulnerability, just on a bigger scale. If we can hit it with sustained fire while maintaining high heat output, the shields will fail. And how do we generate that kind of heat? Torres asked. We use the planet, Leo said, gesturing to Green Hollow below them. This system's star puts out intense radiation during solar flares. There's one predicted in 30 hours. If we can lure the Emperor's flagship into close orbit during the flare, his shields will be fighting both our weapons and solar radiation. Commander Drask stepped forward from where he'd been standing quietly. The Vryn commander had surrendered after the Dominator fell, but instead of execution, Leo had asked for something else. Information and testimony. Drask had provided both, his faith in the Empire shattered by their willingness to commit genocide. The Emperor will see it as cowardice if you hide behind a planet's star, Drask said. He'll pursue. He cannot allow himself to look weak, especially not to species he considers inferior. If you challenge him directly, he will accept even if it's a tactical mistake. So we bait him, Torres said, understanding. Make him angry enough to ignore strategy. Leo looked at Rascal, who sat calmly amid the chaos of the war room. The honey badger had become a mascot of sorts, his image painted on ships across the fleet. Some species found it amusing, a ferocious little animal as a symbol of resistance, but those who'd fought alongside Rascal knew better. The badger represented something simple and profound, never backing down no matter the odds. I'll send the challenge, Leo said. It should come from me. He knows who I am. The message was simple. Leo, standing on Green Hollow's surface with Rascal beside him, broadcast directly to the incoming fleet. Emperor of the Vryn, you come to destroy my home because you're afraid. Afraid that if one farm kid and a badger can resist you, others will too. You're right to be afraid. We're waiting for you. The response came within the hour. The Emperor's voice was like gravel sliding down metal, translated by computers into something Leo could understand. Human child, you will watch your world burn before I kill you slowly. Your animal companion will die first, so you can know the price of defiance. Sounds like he's interested, Leo said to the assembled commanders. Now we prepare the welcome. The battle began as the sun rose over Green Hollow. The Vryn fleet entered the system in formation, the Emperor's flagship leading. They'd expected to face scattered resistance, easy pickings. Instead, they found a unified fleet waiting in orbit, ships from 50 species flying in coordinated patterns that had taken months to perfect. The opening exchange was brutal. Vryn weapons tore through the Resistance fleet's weaker shields. 2 ships exploded in the first minute, but the Resistance wasn't fighting to win a straight battle. They were fighting to draw the Emperor forward, to make him chase them toward the sun as it built toward its solar flare. Leo watched from the command center, coordinating with Pip's help. Fighter Wing 3, break right. Telonian Squadron, focus fire on the flagship's port side. Make him angry. Make him want to catch you. The Emperor's response was predictable. He ordered his fleet to pursue, to crush these insects who dared challenge him. His flagship accelerated, leaving the main fleet behind in his eagerness to personally oversee the victory. He's taking the bait, Admiral Torres said, monitoring the enemy's position. 20 minutes to optimal solar flare positioning. Those 20 minutes were the longest of Leo's life. Ships died on both sides, good people, brave people sacrificing themselves to buy time. Leo watched the casualty reports climb and felt sick, but he couldn't stop now. If they failed here, every death would be meaningless. Rascal pressed against Leo's leg, offering silent comfort. The badger couldn't understand the tactics, but he understood his human was hurting. That was enough. The solar flare erupted right on schedule, a wave of radiation that lit up every sensor. The Resistance fleet pulled back to safer distance, but the Emperor's flagship, committed to its pursuit, was caught at close range. Shields strained against both solar radiation and weapons fire, heat built within the massive ship's systems. All ships, focus everything on the flagship. Torres ordered. Now! The combined firepower of 50 species, coordinated by Leo's tactical planning and Pip's communications, hammered the Emperor's vessel. The flagship's shields fluctuated, failed in sections, regenerated, failed again. Inside, cooling systems struggled with heat beyond their design specifications. Then Drask sent a message on an encrypted Vrin channel, straight to the Emperor's ship. Leo didn't know what the commander said, but it worked. The flagship suddenly accelerated, abandoning defensive posture for an aggressive charge directly toward Green Hollow. The Emperor was coming to personally finish this fight. He's lost control, Drask said quietly. I told him that my defeat was his fault, that his empire falls because he's weak. He cannot ignore such an insult. He will come in person to kill whoever sent that message. Which was me, Leo said, understanding. He's coming for me specifically. And he'll land troops to search for you, Drask confirmed. It's what I would have done. What the Empire trains us to do. Make it personal. Leo looked at Rascal. You thinking what I'm thinking? The honey badger's expression, as always, suggested he was thinking about biting something important. The Emperor's flagship entered Green Hollow's atmosphere, trailing smoke from a dozen breaches. It was still operational, still deadly, but wounded. It landed in the same field where Leo had first seen Vrin ship 6 months ago, coming full circle. Troops poured out, thousands of them securing a perimeter. Then the Emperor himself emerged, 12 feet tall, his armor more elaborate than any Leo had seen. He carried no weapons. He didn't need them. He was the Emperor and the galaxy was supposed to kneel. Leo walked out to meet him, Rascal at his side. No armor, no weapons, just a farm kid in worn clothes and a scarred honey badger. Behind them, hidden in the forest and fields, hundreds of resistance fighters waited. You are the human child, the Emperor said, his voice not needing translation. You have caused me considerable annoyance. You threatened my home, Leo replied simply. I protected it, by uniting primitives and weaklings, by spreading defiance like a disease. The Emperor studied Leo with genuine curiosity. Why, what drives a youngling to challenge an empire? Surely you knew you would lose. Because someone had to try, Leo said. Because the galaxy is full of people you call weak who are just tired of being afraid. And because I had help, he gestured to Rascal. He taught me that size doesn't matter when you're protecting what you love. The Emperor actually laughed. This animal? You credit a beast with strategy? I credit him with courage. Everything else I just learned by watching him. Rascal chose that moment to do what he did best. The honey badger charged the Emperor of the Vrin Empire, covering the distance in a blur of fur and fury. Imperial guards raised weapons, but the Emperor waved them off, amused. He reached down to grab the small animal, confident in his strength. His confidence lasted right up until Rascal's jaws found a gap in the ceremonial armor and drew blood. The Emperor roared in pain and surprise, staggering backward. His guards moved forward, but Rascal was already dodging away, taking position between Leo and the Vrin soldiers. In the silence that followed, every being watching understood something profound. The Emperor had been made to bleed by an earth animal. The invincible had been wounded by the small. The symbol mattered more than the injury itself. Enough, the Emperor snarled. Kill them both. Kill everything on this world. That's when the real resistance revealed itself. From the forest came not just armed fighters but animals. Enhanced dogs from a dozen colonies. Modified cats that moved like shadows. Earth creatures adapted for frontier worlds. All answering the call that Leo and the resistance had sent out. Protect your humans. Protect your homes. The Battle of Green Hollow became legend. Not because of great tactics or superior weapons, but because of what it represented. Humans fighting alongside their animal companions. Supported by alien species who'd learned that strength came in many forms. The Vrin troops, demoralized by their emperor's vulnerability, and surrounded by an enemy that fought with personal loyalty rather than imperial duty, began to surrender. The emperor himself fought to the last, unwilling to accept defeat from those he considered beneath him. When he finally fell, wounded and captured, it was Rascal who stood guard over him, daring anyone to finish what the battle had started. Don't kill him, Leo said, arriving with medics. He's defeated. That's enough? The Emperor looked at Leo with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. You should kill me. I would have killed you. I know, Leo said. But I'm not building an empire. I'm protecting a home. There's a difference. The war didn't end that day. The Vryn Empire had too much territory, too many systems to fall quickly. But it had been broken. Other commanders, seeing their emperor captured by a child and a badger, began to question. Colonies they'd conquered rose in rebellion. The network of small worlds that Leo had helped build became a true alliance. 3 years later, Leo stood in the same field and watched a very different ceremony. The Green Hollow Accords were being signed, establishing rights and protections for all sentient beings regardless of size or power. Representatives from hundreds of worlds attended, including former Vryn commanders who'd joined the new order. A monument had been built, a statue of a boy and a honey badger, standing together. The inscription read simply, "They reminded us that courage comes in all sizes, and that the bonds we form are stronger than any empire." Leo was 16 now, preparing to leave for university on Earth. He'd study diplomacy and xenobiology, his mother insisted. But he'd always be welcome back on Green Hollow, always be remembered for what he'd done. Rascal, showing his age now despite the enhanced lifespan, dozed in the sun nearby. The honey badger's fighting days were mostly behind him, though he still occasionally scared visiting diplomats by growling at them. Some habits died hard. Pip found Leo by the monument, the young Telonian now a skilled translator working for the new council. "It's strange," Pip said. "To think this all started because you were stubborn enough to protect one refugee child." "You were worth protecting," Leo said simply. "Everyone is." That's what the Vryn never understood. That's what the galaxy forgot until Rascal reminded them. A shuttle was waiting to take Leo to the orbital station, where a ship would carry him to Earth. He knelt down next to Rascal, scratching behind the badger's ears one last time. "You coming with me?" Leo asked, though he knew the answer. Rascal was tired, content to spend his remaining years on the farm he'd helped defend. He'd earned his rest. The honey badger looked at Leo with eyes that held more understanding than most beings gave animals credit for. Then he licked Leo's hand and closed his eyes, returning to his nap. His job was done. His human was safe. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Leo stood, wiped his eyes, and walked toward the shuttle. Behind him, the monument stood in the sun, a reminder of a simple truth the galaxy had forgotten and then remembered. Don't come between a human and those they love. Don't underestimate the small, the stubborn, the loyal, and never ever mess with a honey badger's family. The galaxy had learned that rule the hard way. And from that hard lesson had come something better. A galaxy where size didn't determine worth, where fear no longer ruled, and where a farm kid and his badger had changed everything by simply refusing to back down. As the shuttle lifted off, Leo looked back one last time at Green Hollow, at home, at the field where it all began. Somewhere down there, a honey badger slept in the sun, dreaming perhaps of adventures past, and across 100 worlds, beings of every species told the story of Leo and Rascal, reminding each other that heroes come in all forms, and that sometimes the smallest can be the bravest. The galaxy had remembered, and it would never forget again.